traffic offenses, folks who like, with their V8s or the pro boxes, because there's no difference, sort of use the road the way they do. And you arrest that person, say it's in the morning, because that's a classic time, right?
Yeah.
And the punishment for them is not to go pay a bill. That's not an issue we've seen. But it's to sit there for the 3 hours that they were running somewhere and think and report back what their thoughts have been. Is it about the action? It's a very, I usually think that would be a very interesting thing to have afforded someone something they don't use anymore. Time to freaking think. And that's one place you see, I mean, from the buildings that will not use natural light, but hey, Dubai style, to those kinds of traffic offenses, and the fact that the way we think of punishment or justice to things is tied to things people have figured out how to, rig, so that we don't end up with a virtuous circle that is actually helping people use their entire capacities. Now, I think 2020 is showing everyone in the world there is no way we can argue that all these mechanisms, all these business privatized versions of everything have made the world a better place, right? Because no one had this, and no one was ready for this pandemic, for example. And it's forced a lot of people to sit and think. So it's going to be interesting to see how thinking how thinking has worked. It's been interesting to hear from people who are like, they've picked up skills that left behind such a long time ago. Somebody has a piano that's been rotting, or art that they used to draw and using that as a way. So using creativity as this extracurricular activity. But I wonder what it's unlocking for people, and especially entire adults who had probably been told, this is just something you do as extracurricular. But it doesn't necessarily, is not shown that if you're going to be a doctor, the triad of doctor, lawyer, whatever, maybe architect, for a short period of time, got some glory there. Those are not the things you were expected to bring your entire faculties to. And now basically you have a bunch of us as walking robots. And in a sense also you see that people punish others for enjoying their art. So you can see that it can get there because there's a callousness to your own appreciation or skills that then becomes callous to the market of people who are right now saying payment by exposure is not a payment.
It's not okay,
Let's be clear.
Actually,
I
was talking to my sister about it because for some reason she was like, but when in the education system, like when I was in class 4 is when art and crafts was removed from the Kenyan syllabus. And then she was asking like, so how did you keep up with like your talent and skill or whatever? And I was reflecting on how like compositions and intros were like the only space that I could exercise, a bit of creative thinking. I couldn't get too like crazy because you're already told you have to put in this number of like methalis, this like what.
That's it.
Your thinking is already shaped in that way. The only way I got through that is like through music fests, drama fests, writing plays and stuff, writing like diaries or whatever. And then when I got to high school, we had like a secret guild where we would write our own romance novels. Like the entire purpose of like any kind of art form that we perform, because even in primary school, like we would draw and like design jewelry and stuff, but it was always like these 5 girls, and like we would send the things to each other like the desk in class. So already we're being told like what you're doing is a waste of time, it's illegal, like, be ashamed of it.
Exactly.
It becomes really difficult then when you're being asked, so what do you want to do with your life? You can't just be like, I want to be an artist, because you've already been told from childhood, like, unless
the backhand you get, go think, child.
And then if you draw something and then they're like, it's devil worship, it's demonic. And
I remember that. Ooh, child, that was a huge one. That was a huge one. Devil worship, shame. No, it's a systemic issue. So much, and even another layer to it. So those of us who have those stories of how we maybe sort of survived and cultivated through the 844 system, when we come out to the real world of adulting, or the scam that is adulting, really, and different people it's worked out differently. There are those who've been able to actually continue with that or make their career trajectories about that. I think there's a tension that's also existent where when we see other people, younger people coming and are able to exert themselves much faster than we probably did, there's a kingwashe there, if you call it that, that's coming at people, and they don't realize that that's what's happening. It's also it's a cry from deep down for the part of you that probably died in the process or never got to exist fully. And when you see it manifested in somebody else, maybe the instinct is like, I'll show them. If I didn't get it, they can't get it that easy. Rather than seeing it for the success of the cumulative effect of holding that door in that space. And I see that then in how industries are starting to shape up. You have to have these people who are necessary gatekeepers. And the classic story and especially I find it's a very particular Kenyan thing. If you find people already ahead of you, they must tell you the story of their hardship that you're supposed to relate, and you must somehow go through that same fire, much in the same way, or perhaps even more dramatically, depending on whether it's giving them some sort of catharsis. That is then keeps us in this loop where we're not seeing, we start losing sight of the bigger picture. And this transcends even from just say creative industries to even the banking or any other industries. Do you have these unhealthy work cultures or these unhealthy spaces of growing and nurturing? Because we have so many people have been hurt and they feel like everyone must go through what I went through. It's a way of getting our vengeance or dealing with our trauma, and you're passing it on to others and not seeing the success that, sorry it happened to you, but you should celebrate that it's become easier for another woman to do it easier, or a younger artist to get there faster. We don't always have to have the same arc. And I think that's where we are currently with the conversations around why we find ourselves in this cycle. And the question is how we start to see that it's a cycle that we actually need to break. Because we can't have another generation of creatives 5 years from now saying it's the same thing that's happening to them, whether they're in filming, whether they're in music or anything else. And if we need to sit on this moment and just have a great kumbaya or whatever, that will help people deal with that colorlessness, because colorlessness is the enemy of art, whether it was the system as 844 or you and how life has brought hardships that make you feel like you must, cover that space and punish everybody else for it. That callousness is what does need to be addressed and seen for its entirety and the many forms it takes, so we can actually start doing what we know we're capable of doing. We've mapped it. We have the GDP numbers, we have economy, all the things that should get everybody excited. But still, the actual work of doing the stuff comes to this untidy work that we've not given time to, I think.
And I think it's this narrative, especially tied with creatives, and I was talking to Keguro on Twitter about it this week, this idea that like your suffering makes your work more authentic, or that you can't make authentic work without suffering, and how people capitalize on that trauma. Like people outside of you capitalize on that trauma, and they're like, hey, you see, like this person is making this kind of work, and it's like romanticized, and you're like, she made it when she was colorblind and didn't know the difference between pink and brown. Like one of her fingers was like chopped off, like she still managed to. I'm like, it's not a must, because even me, my suffering, I'm like, I recognize that it's suffering and it was unnecessary suffering, right? So I don't want to pass that on to other people. Like more often than not, when I'm having like intergenerational conversations, even in my own career, there's always been a like that gosh, like there's always been do you know how much we have done for you? Like, do you recognize that you're here because and I'm like, yes, but like what form of recognition
are you looking
for you to chill, so that we
do I need to take the same burden, bear it, and add my own and then pass it on? Is that what we're saying? Because after that, you come out clearly and say, yep, if I've suffered, everyone must suffer, but you're doing it from a point of consciousness. Because a lot of this is unconscious infliction of harms and traumas. And I really liked what Keguro said, because he called it what it is. Sometimes it's just trauma, and let's stop romanticizing that there's this notion that we must go through trauma. And it's a very specific language you find for artistic or other processes, and especially on Black bodies, right? Our whole MO is we must have a rags to riches story. We must have this pain to gain story, this pendulum swing that takes us through. And it's creating, it's actually harmful. It is actually harmful, and it's something that has to be held in the space for these conversations, even as people are crafting agendas or how we'll make an industry of this or whatever. But that's I really appreciated Keguro saying that, and I hope that it resonated, and maybe that's the kind of ngwashi people need.
Ngwashi,
the real ngwashi.
Yeah. Because the thing is, like, with our work and reaching out and like offering people therapy and stuff, we've sort of realized that people want to cling to like their suffering and are kind of like committed to it because they're either scared that like without it they'll not be able to make work, which is already like an interesting thing to just craft. Tell yourself that like without my suffering, I wouldn't have been the artist that I am, the creative that I am. I wouldn't have like found ways, you know, to speak the way I speak, which I don't personally. I'm like, I feel like everyone is an artist, and then that creativity is channeled that like more utilitarian models. Like now, you know, doctors are artists, right? Like it takes a lot of creativity, especially like with your hands to be a doctor. Lawyers are artists, even though nobody likes lawyers.
Their particular art is of the dark variety.
Exactly, the dark arts. That's where lawyers are.
That's where they shine.
At like each profession, I think this is particularly interesting when you look at Kenya, because as you're saying, like our imagination has been stuck in a particular place for a really long time. You look at each profession, like there's some creativity that you're supposed to bring into it, but our schooling system like told us no, creativity is useless. Just the answer is not. Don't argue for B or C or D. Just this is the
don't
answer.
Question
this
why
is how you get to it.
Exact. Right.
Yeah, and don't even like think deeply about it. Just if you can, you can pass the exams, and then now you know how to follow instructions.
And you think
I
of
wonder about that space when I see windows at the corridor, and you're just like, okay, so did we think here?
The thinking thing, if we sit with it, is even if you think about the people running this country, the only creativity we've seen is in stealing our resources.
Absolutely.
Which is actually, for me, I mean, I've always said, like, I'm not saying Kenya's corruption is exceptional, but it is instructive in you can tell when you read about it or you hear about it, the faculties that have been activated to get those machineries going and even sustained as industries is creativity misused.
Yeah.
Because now we're sitting on layers of building a society or communities in all the wrong ways. And it's a big classic case study on how not to do it.
Yeah.
So that what we're supposed to have working is working, but it's working on the wrong side. It's working on how to steal. Yeah. It's working on the fact that we knew when this virus came, we knew the template, we knew. And it's amazing to see how much it's no longer enough to say we knew, we saw it. We started asking funders, why are you giving them money?
Yeah.
Why? We know what's going to happen. We're tired of it. We're sitting now at a crossroads that's going to be so fascinating in terms of how we deal with it.
Yeah.
That what you said about if everybody in whatever sector they're in was allowed space or allowed themselves space to see and appreciate the creativity as well as the technical or scientific or whatever other side of it they think it is. If you're able to find ways to rehabilitate that creativity, that creative side of you, whatever that means for you, right? It might just mean more ways to think about the technical thing or whatever, but not this notion that it's the pain, because that hurt. It's so painful actually to think about artists of any kind, especially in the art sector, thinking that art can only be made if it's coming from this place of pain, because then you'll start demanding pain and harm in your life to produce a product. We cannot have or be saying we're willing to sacrifice people to a cesspool of demonic trauma in the name of art.
Yeah.
No. And it's one thing for those who've already gone through that. It's another thing to look at a population that is 75% young and say that X%, even 1% is too much for people to say that's the niche of how they're going to make a living or become a person. We're not going to I think if nothing else, we cannot, hopefully we can leave this moment we're in with an agreement not to normalize this notion that you must go through pain, whether you're going through banking, whether you're going through more formalized creative industries like in agencies. There has to be something that has to be done. And my thinking, the only big thought I've had, I think, during this pandemic is the biggest job in demand in Kenya is actually therapists.
Yeah, that's
Everybody needs a
definitely,
in this
definitely,
country. And you know, of course,
absolutely, yeah.
that invokes for people, oh, you must be sick, you must be unwell. No, we
Mm.
need thinking of it as spaces to hold, somebody holding a space for you to think, to deal with harms, to just meet your entire self is so important. Friends can't do it entirely because friendships are very different. Relationships cannot do it entirely because they're built for very different things. We absolutely are going to see and have such a need in this country right now because we're facing a crisis of all sorts, and mental for
Mental
once
health, yeah.
is something we are seeing is a critical issue we're dealing with.
Yeah, I was thinking that's also the other thing where creativity is so linked to craziness. Like on the one hand, you know, people are like, oh, if I'm not, you know, if I don't have this suffering, if I don't have this trauma, that like my creativity will go. And then on the other hand, people don't want to fall into the, you know, crazy artist space. So they feel like seeing a therapist then confirms that they're crazy. I think it's also interesting because I was just linking what you've said about how creative and corruption is to like us passing our drawings to the desk in like high school, because already we're being told like, yeah, if you want to be creative, it has to happen in illegal, you know, in your magic kind
back
of
channel,
ways.
yeah, the surface
so
is raw.
so
We're
every
living
time
in
I
a
see like
reality.
scandal, I'm just like, get it.
Now you just mark you grade the creativity like, god damn, those patients, and some was just pure ingenuity.
Yeah.
There's a story in the papers this week about these two Kenyan sisters who had been scamming Americans. But these guys have been, they already have hit the statute of limitations, so they've been at it for a hot minute. Even before we had this internet of balloons right now, like these guys were on it, right? We are living in a very warped reality. I mean, and I think, again, I can only speak to the Kenyan one that I know very well, that feels very particularly clear. It's there for you to see. Right is wrong, wrong is right. What are we doing here? And where are we going here? All the faculties come alive when we're trying to carve our way out of whatever has been made as the formal, because the formal was designed to be exclusive. It was meant to be soul breaking, back breaking. Another question becomes, can we actually bring what has been channeled to so-called informal or illegal to become the system? What needs to, and I think that's a question now. What do we do? Do we break down this one because we're in a system, we all have our axes ready to do something? Do we break down this one that's not working, or do we formalize the one that has been informal or illegal and then figure out whether that continues? Because all the experiments we've had so far in getting the policies right, I mean on paper, right, all the things are supposed to work, are still going towards a system that is designed and has normalized and crystallized a hardened way of doing things. So it's designed to not work. It's designed to fail. Can we continually keep feeding that? I think of, for example, the efforts that have been done by many sectors in this country, the creative economy being one of them, you know, getting to consult with government, getting, you know, written into laws and policies, but getting a budget. Now, when you get the budget, you know you've made it, but you've made it to scandal zone. Because whatever budget was earmarked for this project or program, you always know it's going to be a scandal. You always know somebody's cousin is the one who gets the benefit, right? That's why we've hit a snag where we're putting all our right energies to building systems. But again, it's sustaining a system that is already not trying to have any of us in it. And again, to get out of this moment, not just the pandemic, but where the country is, where the world is, it will need creativity. The very thing we have been told only certain people think, and it takes a socioeconomic status, a racial one, a gendered one, and say everybody's supposed to bring their best selves to the work ahead. How are we going to do that all of a sudden? And I think in Kenya, for me, it really, what maddens me right now is we have a generation of CSs, especially cabinet secretaries, whose kids are artists, right? Of some form or other. I've really been taken by this in the last Kenyatta and two regimes, in a way, of the sons and daughters of certain high-ranking people are artists, and the parents will come out as parents and celebrate their kids, but go back and set such stupid policies for other children, but want to come and tell us, my fellow brothers and sisters, hey, are we together? We are not. And that slap in the face has been quite something, because what it's saying is some things are for certain people. So now you must be rich to be creative, or you must belong to the right family to have access to that creativity.
Yeah.
By the way, you're not even going to cultivate that skill here, because the first thing is to send people away. So I feel kind of it's going to be interesting for this period where how you go into the UK, boo boo, pandemic. It's going to be interesting. But that slap in the face has been there. I think there's been at least 3 or 4, if not more, cabinet secretary level type of people who've come and bragged for us about their kids.
Yeah.
And good for those kids that they, as their parents, have done that. But these people have another responsibility and have denied other kids that opportunity to harness that, you know. As the old joke goes, if Mark Zuckerberg was from Mukuru Kwanjenga, never couldn't have ever been known, right? So I don't know. I mean, and that's it's if we can get a few more people seeing how all these things are connected. The creative imperative on all of us is to see that all thoughts can sit and coexist together. Much in the same way, those who think they have ideas out of this can realize, fine, you work in years of jargony, language, invention, but that's a creativity. The way this jargon keeps moving is creativity, bar none. Yeah. But the same person who thinks about it as illustrating something or carving something or anything in between and thereafter has something to offer. And that's what we need to find space again for. However slow paced it'll take, as we deal with our own guashes of, it wasn't this easy for me, no one did it for me. I'm sure the people who listen to this kind of conversation say, oh, that's nice, you can think of it that way. I'm like, I'm taking whatever will be called privilege at this point to do exactly that, thinking as a freaking public service. Yeah. So I'm not out there trying to say that I'm going to impose my worldview based on what I've not read or not done or whatever, and shape a world for whole other people who have so much more to offer. How can I build my own personal space to be like, okay, I can cultivate it, I can think, read, whatever. But also make sure when I go out there and I'm asserting something, I'm also building the whole idea of how we co-create will come from that. That's the personal, because the personal is political in that way. That's how I think about it. This notion that these things are privileges is another very bothersome one. Thinking or artistry or doing, because that's the other angle to it. If it's not an illegal thing, it's a privilege thing. It's a luxury thing. And I'm like, no, we can't live in a world where thinking is a privilege, right?
Those two are sort of tied because most privileged people can get away with illegal things. And so when you do it and you're the daughter of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, then it's like you're untouchable in that sense. It's also quite interesting for me because like went through 844 and then I did IB, and IB was the first time that I was in an education system where I felt wanted, like I could have a thought and people would accept it into the space, and just be like, oh, that's interesting, why do you think that? Because my whole 844 thing, apart from I think the history class where the teacher would get bored and be like, okay, come teach. Apart from that, everything else was just like, if I had a question, like you start shaking. And it's so interesting to even see like when you have manuals or whatever, back when we could meet in public, see, like the kind of people who would have questions and then everyone else who would just be there in that sort of, for I have come here to receive your great information.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Mine is just a comment. Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, it's done a number on folks. So in as much as we're talking about rehabilitating a right to think, part of it for me is tied so much to what I was saying about the mental health care that we need at individual, community, and national levels. I mean, I think most people maybe hear that and think those are those Western things people say. But you think about it as a disruption of what used to work for us. I mean, and you read about, how communities were formed before. There was a holistic care. Even, growing up in, say, even Nairobi in the 90s, something I always remind myself of and talk with a lot of folks about is the community. Even if you were in an estate, wherever, you knew how if you're caught stealing, my guy, or doing something random, you'll be beaten, never, like that communal care parenting. Or you knew which house will have chapels and y'all will go as kids and go. That is completely gone.
Yeah.
And so we're being juxtaposed a system that already didn't work for the people who are imposing on us, who now want to Columbus our old ways of doing and then come back and sell them to us. You know, this scholar Shilbembe says the Western Archive is dead, and right on, because there is nothing there. They gave us the Enlightenment, sour, great. It focused on the individual. All right, maybe that worked for them. They came and violently disrupted what we had and told us it was nothing. Now we're getting to a point where their system and the madness of the iteration of our system being disrupted have met. And everyone's realizing, oh snap, okay, maybe we should have left communities kind of like how they knew how to do their thing. And maybe those Columbuses of those days should have been going out with more humility than a violent streak, and learned a thing or two. So that now we're caught up in the theater of who's going to lead this. And to do it, it'll take that whole person or whole communities that have remembered and asserted themselves. But as Ipatani, I mean, we've created such a holy mess that again, the very faculties we need to get us out of, we've been telling people for so long, are not viable. This is the AGM that I think we absolutely do need to have. And it's not a privileged conversation. It's a conversation should be happening in every possible place, baraza that people are having across. Because people know deep down in the heart of hearts is the question that's worrying them about this country, for example. That mambo ipatani, what are we going to do? That's it. It starts with, are you a whole self in coming in the solution space? Or are you, for real, are you trying to put yourself as a messiah now? Kukula your turn. Let's be honest, because those are two very different things. You can look the part, you can talk the part, but we're going to sniff out when it's not the part, because we're still, somewhere deep down, we still have the dying embers of getting it right. For the generations that are growing up now, for those of us who are full adults, young adults, the older folks, it's an intergenerational work process that needs to happen. And I always like to think of it as, how do you, and I'm sure most people think of it as some weird neo-what space of healing the world. I mean, it's not just a Michael Jackson song, but it's the imperative, right? But you can't remake the world without remaking yourself. And that's what I've been sitting with this season. As Ben Okri said, you cannot remake the world without remaking yourself. And I think the work of remaking yourself is recovering all the parts of you that have been forced to die along the way. And for many Kenyans, it's going to be that creative side of them, the song they had in their heart, the skill they had on their hand, and other things like that, and bringing it back alive, nurturing it, and then bringing the 2 parts or 15 parts of you that need to be, which is perfectly fine, and making them help you become a better person to yourself and to the community around you.
For me, it's like 2 things. If you look at it historically, one of the colonial missions of the British was to teach art to the natives, right? Because they came to East Africa, they didn't find paintings and, metal sculptures. So they're like, these people don't know art. It is our imperative to educate them and show them what this is. And I've found one that like, there's that tension as far as like what artist is involved, where I say I'm an artist, people are like, oh, neza kunichora, because that's
that became the stand-in, right?
They're like, okay, art is drawing and sculptures. Let's not talk about Sonko's lions, but that's probably
let's avoid that for national interest.
Those are the 2
they still there, by the way? First of all, I haven't passed that road in our
been CBD in so long, just because the trauma of that art.
Once was enough, I think.
Interesting.
I remember my reaction was literally. I was in a car or something. I just know there was a very ugly reaction of my part. But exactly to your point, that we limited it to those 2.
And then on the other side, because like the East African tradition of art was lived art, so it was what you wear, the songs, the poem, the theater. I've had people who are like, oh, I'm an artist, and I'm like, oh, what song do you sing? And in my mind, I'm like, there's many things between like drawing and being a musician. And even like arguing with people about whether architects are
artists, right?
Not. Because I remember when I went to AU and I showed them my KCSE results, they were like, if you want to draw, you can draw in architecture. Like, don't
Oh God, yeah.
yeah.
Boy. In fact, architecture was like the program, and it's funny to think about it because I just remembered like folks like Cheesy, Muto Rebecca, Della all went to architecture. I don't know if it had been articulated, but architecture was like, you're smart, but you're really insisting on this art thing, and that's what will square the circle for you. Like high enough passing grade doing kind of thing, so the system has done enough for a number on you. Here we can kill your spirit, but keep you doing the cute thing that you want. Because you look around this town today and you're like, with all the construction going on, how many architects have actually been allowed to bring their best selves?
Yeah.
You know, that's how the system is adaptive, if nothing else.
Yeah, because it will very much tell you if you got like a C minus, fine, good draw. If you got an A minus.
Architecture was very like A minus, B plus kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you used to have these other design courses, you're right, that are uko now when you're on the lower spectrum of B. That's okay, all the other courses are out, become all these other ones that are uko for, whatever. Yeah, you all can go to Bachelor of Arts or whatever. It's fascinating how, that has, but we are also the folks who, I think folks who were in uni between the 90s and 2000s who started to see the life for what it is. We'd seen the 844 life for what it is.
Yeah.
And a very critical generation of folks who've still preserved their right and to creativity, many of whom have done great work right now. So more power to them.
Yeah.
But in fact, it just made me wonder, is it easier now for the kids who are going to architecture or the same courses and programs we're saying? We made it, okay, we fought our way, defied the odds. Has it made it slightly easier, right? Sure, I mean, our focus has become on surviving this big adult scam, right? But what becomes, and that's the thing about how do we, in building, we have also gotten to a point where we get moments, right? We get moments that catalyze something. We vote something in, we vote people out as opposed to voting in the systems we want. Because now we're stuck in the loop of getting rid of something that has bothered us so much, but rebuilding is a very difficult work. We can have a moment, we can create a moment like Kenyan creatives deserve better, which they absolutely do. But this hard work of what comes the day after, a month after, a year after we've had that moment, many people have lost it just because there's so many other battles to be fought. You cannot rely on emotion alone, narrative ventriloquism to get, this people's emotion. And even after you rile up people's emotions or whatever, people resonate. What happens next?
What happens?
This is a crisis in this country, actually. How do we build or rebuild without selling out? We had the 2002 project. See how that went. We've had many others down the road and before. We've had the moment started, but then somewhere along the way we lost because these parts of ourselves have not come back together. Even today, if we raise it all or get a carte blanche and start building, the people who are coming into it are not carte blanche, right? And so very quickly you can see, we know the trajectory now. A few people will start by day 100, they'll have, because it seems like 3 months is the lifeline, they'll start eking each other out. Somebody's trying to say, okay, us guys will form this faction, box out this person, and then the usual circle. I mean, you end up with a hardened bunch of people who are doing it, and the others who are outside screaming, inside saying, how could you do this, and yada, yada, yada. So that's another thought that's been a very important one. How do we get beyond understanding, I think, on a logical level that it takes individuals to build institutions that must outlive the individuals. But in that process, not burning the whole thing and not having a vicious circle, somehow remaining. How do we know when it's our turn to not lead? And this is another thing, when you've been part of the revolution, it's no guarantee you'll be the leader on the other side. Today's revolution very easily be tomorrow's tyrant. So in the things that we're building, we can be the catalyst for what needs to be built. We know that, for example, we need to, form an association. Just because I'm the one who had the idea and rallied people does not necessarily mean because of doing that, I am automatically the one to become director for life. Because it's always that. So how do we delink the notion that there's the work to be done on rallying people, the revolutionary moment, and the building? It's not guaranteed that your strengths for one are the ones for the other. That's a very difficult conversation, not just in creative sector, it's really much in our country and in the world. And yeah, that's another one. I mean, it's going to take a lot of creative ways of facilitating the conversations, sitting with our emotions individually and collectively as the people who want to do something, and our energies can then be calibrated accordingly. Otherwise, it's going to be the same cycle, but the world is telling us we can't, you know, you guys, you humans, enough, right? You cannot have all this and still get it so wrong.
Yeah.
I can always say, let the elephants and the lions have a run at it. I mean, if we're not capable of doing this, if we don't get it right to this one, I don't know when we do, hey?
Yeah, that's the thing that I was reflecting on, because as we're doing sort of research, or like what I call an audit of the creative sector, we're finding that there are a lot of associations and guilds and societies that were formed and aren't necessarily doing anything, or like were formed and are there but like feel powerless and can't really shift anything, or like were formed and are there and are now like the number of complaints of like corruption, or you know, like where is our money, or what are you doing for us, are like super high. I was just thinking of that, because quite often, just because you're the person who like said, okay, let's unite, let's come together, let's do this, doesn't mean you have the skill
right
to actually do the things. And that's like one thing where we're trying to grapple with, because all of us come from like different backgrounds and have like different skills. But like, what can we actually do, and what do we need help with? Because on the one hand, you know, there's like guilds that we were looking at and talking to, and you know, the guy was like, I'm an actor, like first and foremost, so that's my priority. And my now being told that you're an organizer like doesn't gel with my skill set. So, and that means that if you come to me with a complaint about a producer and that producer has cast me for a thing, my priority will be my acting, not your issue, which is like perfectly valid. I was like, so why do you have this position? And it's like, oh, because I was one of the people who was shouting. So and I'm like, but you can't like handle the role that you've been given, but you feel, I guess, entitled to it, because there's also this thing, and I completely understand, because how this nation treats whistleblowers and like people with opinions is completely ugly. And there's this, now that I have suffered this thing I cannot do, that I do not have the skills and I'm not even interested in, is mine. Like I deserve, because I'm one who started shouting.
Right.
And even though it's ruining my life and like I'm underperforming in this area, I still deserve, because I'm the one, you know. So we found it quite interesting in that sense. But then there was also, when we're looking at the structures, so you have the guilds, the associations, the societies, the union, which are underfunded, so that even if you know you're capable of doing the work, it's on a voluntary basis. So that means when you can afford to do it is when you'll do it. And that then renders you sort of powerless, because I mean, even with us, just the amount of people who reached out with their stories, and they were like, can you help with this, can you help this, like this day we're still trying to like get down the list and see how many people you know we can help. And that's like one thing. And then after that you go to like the other level of power, which is let's say the ministries that are involved, which is ICT, Mosca, industrialization for some reason. Because this very interesting thing happened that's sort of endemic to the creative space, where it's extractive. The government has decided that like the creative economy will depend on like doing things to foreign, you know, powers, or exporting things, right? And that's how they'll make money. And so when you come to those spaces, they're not like, Ati, we like you and your creativity and we want to nourish it. And the perfect example of this is like fashion, where they were like, okay, we will divorce fashion from textiles, because with textiles, we can create EPZ spaces. Right?
Clean and clear, the thing they
Clean and
understand,
clear.
let's go. Yeah.
They will come and they will give us money and great. And then fashion, you know, mtajivunia on your own. Yeah. Yeah, and you have like that kind of attitude where it's like, if it's Kenyan creatives, it's like good luck. And then if you can export your skill, they're like, okay, so now you guys come here. Let's
like you. Can we put you on a poster?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you go to the ministry.
It's this Kenya hates their own mentality there.
Yeah. And you go to the ministry, and the ministry will tell you, we don't have enough people to deal with you. We have enough people to deal with foreigners. Like that's that capacity that we can do. So you guys and your problems, good luck. Because even the ministry will be like, oh, we're underfunded, so we can't afford to pay enough people to interact with you. Yeah, and then you just go to the government that's like, we can make more money exporting stuff than building, you know, any kind of support for you guys. So unless foreign funder comes and says, iPhone competition, we're good. But yeah,
and that's it. And they'll still get the narrative of, yes, building local, buying local. We see it in all the taglines and marketing speaks. But it's part the question of where if we have, say, limited energies and we figured out how to put into work, what would be the best place to do it? Do you build things outside of a system? Do you go and, you know, sacrifice people into the system to try and change it from within? And those have been the bigger meta questions, I think. Because in a place like that has built over 100 years, really, this notion of extraction, you know, the colonizers were pretty much just extracting and eating all the fun while at it. And that's exactly what was passed on. There's been very little that's been adapted. And the ideological battle, you know, I always say it's really fascinating. If I had come in a past life to have existed in the 60s, right? You have this wave of independence, you have these ideological battles on how we're going to set up stuff. And then by the 70s, it's all but gone. The systematic assault was so quick. And there's really not been much, enough. There's been great, in Kenya especially, there's been a great intellectual undercurrent for all these things, art, everything. Especially look at, again, in the 70s and the 80s, building up to multi-party in the 90s. And the folks who had fought for so long in the underground became the ones in power today. And, you know, they forgot that just because you've defeated the oppressor, please don't become one. But sometimes you can be so focused on being, you know, slaying the monster, you forget to keep nurturing. And that's why I keep coming back to this notion of nurturing. Well, you're taking time off when you were in the struggle. I know it sounds very stupid to say that to most people. And the struggle right now does not afford us that, because it's been cultivated to kill us in the process. So that when you get there, you can only be callous. That's the only thing you know how to work with. So that even today, I'm like, even if you got the best person, again, we've seen this with many ministries, let me say, I forgot their own dollar. One of us, that one, he gets it. You forget that the system gets people too, right? And the system is not just a system in government, it's just a very good one to show us the meta example. Sectors that shape up or start becoming the seat of power and influence. And I don't know. I see and understand it. And now the question does become, what creative faculties and, you know, individual ones you'll need and communal ones in terms of support for you to see that and understand that, and honestly even be tempted by it, but still keep a higher plane, which is a very difficult job. I can't lie. Even for myself, I have to do it every day, and I'm like, do I know? I always ask myself, you know, when you give up and when you give out, will it be on your terms, or will it be the system defining it for you? Because those are also two very different things. Everybody has their, what I call the mwisho wa lami, you know, where the tarmac is. And that's it's going to remain that way for as long as the system is very intact, which it is. And many of us even now will even found a renewed conversation happening now. Something will happen. Somebody will come for one person in particular and be like, okay, let's sort you out. In sorting you out, you become the ambassador for it's not so bad, right? Just wait your turn, just work hard, and all those things you hear.
Yeah.
And I like to have people thinking about this even when it doesn't look like a possibility, because it can go from not being a possibility to immediately to tomorrow. That's where this fascination with the rags to riches comes in this country, because it's like we're all playing one big Hunger Games, when we're even co-opting the systems and the revolution and everything to be the one who's selected. Will you actually say no if you're saying it's nothing for me without my people or my squad or whatever? That's a very difficult question. We have forgotten the sense of community, because the individualization post the Enlightenment, that was colonialism and its violence, and then the neo-colonial structures are very intact, and they're rewarding people handsomely. Those are the people we're looking up to as heroes today. The ones who've made some money. If you look at the metrics, right? And it's absolutely understandable, because that's what's become the thing. But if we're not somehow always cultivating the questions of, okay, you can have gained all of that. Are you happy? Are you peaceful? Are you doing your best work? If that metric doesn't also matter, we're all just going to be trying to become that, as opposed to finding an alternative. And it sounds very meta, but I think it's important to allow ourselves that freedom to think, that latitude really to take all these thoughts in and stir them up before we say we figured out a solution and this time it's us because we're the younger ones. No, you oldies don't know. No, they thought they knew too at their point, that kind of thing. It's, if we can get, I think if there can be a project of a few more people thinking that way, not because you're trying to come out of it with an answer, but my favorite thing to say is just complicate the equation and marinate in the discomfort. No one is saying come out with an answer in 5 minutes. Somebody say, I'm just saying, take however long it takes to become the best possible version of yourself and a collective that you could possibly be, because you took the time. You took the time now, as opposed to building something that didn't work in the end, because that was still time put to the wrong thing. It's a hard road. There's no template, I think, or one that can fit everyone and their different strengths.
I've been reflecting on that in like two ways. Again, because I just love thinking about the British and the various ways that they traumatized us. Because I was talking about like Black is King, and like the idea of taking the East African landscape and the East African animals and the East African language, and then being like, that's enough. Now let's bring some South Africans and Nigerians and Ghanaians in, make this an African album. And someone was like, but there was Kenyan jewelry. And I was like, that's great. But if I came to your house and I was like, okay, leave, I need to shoot a video here, but like not have you in it at all, and not like rearrange all your things. Because I like the architecture of your house. I just don't like you. That was like very British colonial policy, which is where we get these silhouettes of the Maasai, in the vast landscape, because, the Maasai were the noble warriors who were like showing them the animals. It had this indigenous native knowledge, the native informant. And you see that image like replicated where only a community, and because communities don't have individual faces, communities are just like beautiful crowds of silhouettes like in the distance. The British were like, we can use that. We can only use a particular community. You won't see like a Amba with a wood carving, you won't see a Luo fishing. It's a Maasai with their spear, and it's a silhouette, so you don't even know like who this is. Oh yeah, and definitely.
Now he has a mobile phone.
Yeah, because it's so great that our noble Maasai can now use technology. These noble savages, the natives who are so close with nature, are also, embracing tech.
It's something about reading, as you're saying, really reading and finding the history. that formed this place and this space is it's a very important trajectory. And one thing I also do like about, creativity can't quite die yet is what I've noticed in the last couple of years on Twitter, it's like a shared syllabus folks are creating for each other based on their various readings. It's like a reading, and people don't realize that's what it is. It's actually a reading revolution where we are creating for ourselves the alternatives to Malkiat seeing history. And I think that's beautiful. That's another creativity. No one no one came up with a roadmap, McKinsey style plan and said, this is how people are going to use creative ways to use Twitter. And, I think Twitter for me remains this not representative, obviously, but very critical window of insight about this country and what possible alternatives there could be, just because of the creative use of that app. And it's obviously you see it with Black Twitter writ large, but keeping it down here, it's like the alternative to the Malkiat saying history has been so beautiful to see. Who has mommy's papers from the 70s, or dad had these papers in his archive that we're finding, and then we're co-creating it together. It's a beautiful thing to do and to see. And even if it's not yet being rewarded for what it is as a project of re-archiving that should be supported by the money that has been put aside for archiving and all of that. It's, I think, flexing those muscles, even for people who probably just think themselves, oh, I'm a bookworm and I just wanted to flex my bookwormishness. It's tapping back into that creativity, because it took a lot for you to do that and then share, and the combination of English words used to express yourself and putting this out there. There's, that's what the dying embers, they almost do always seem like they're being put out, but they're always, flaming at the end. Hopefully the fire can spark again, and it doesn't always, we're not just existing on that very edge. That said, that's what resistance came to mean in Kenya from the time of the colony, right? Where we made the space so uncomfortable. I've also been reading about, in fact, the link of Kenya as a colony to the waning British Empire and the rise of the US, including a lot of African Americans who started wanting to come to Kenya because of the connection they were feeling they were getting from Kenyan people. So there's a lot of acrobatics. African Americans aren't getting visas to come because they're meeting the natives and they're getting all revolutionary ideas from each other. But to how they met in the battlefronts of World War I, and they started exchanging notes and reading and learning about, or speaking to one another, and they started to write to one another and that kind of thing. When I think about this whole Afrofuturism, Afro-diasporic art thing, my only contribution is they're not going to be better off figuring out their identities by only selecting parts of us to make a whole. Now, I am not saying I understand their side of the struggle. What I'm saying is we're still exploring and recovering and healing in hegemonic structures that still have you coming out on top and having benefited from the hegemony that created the notion of East Africa or Kenya as this synecdoche of the great land that was just waiting for white people to discover, because that's exactly what Kenya specifically came to mean for the British Empire. So until you've also done that work, I will watch, I will dance, but I'm not going to feel like I'm represented, and you will not get to have me expend too much of my energy justifying myself. I'm already having to negotiate my humanity on way too many fronts. I don't know why I have to do my own brother who says the right words, but is not acting in the right way. Because we've seen the cycle, and I'm like, I'm also tired of seeing us, if you will say it that way, caught up in reacting to them. It's boring at some point. We're wasting our energies when that energy should be, back in what we should have known about ourselves that helps us build this very elusive project. I don't know if we should still try it, of Kenyan identity, but focusing on our own admin. Really, I'd rather focus my energy on our admin and our coexistence than trying to figure out how to unpack why whether Ketepati was in Beyonce's cup in one scene. That was funny though. That was hella hilarious. Yeah, I mean, if we can also, because those are distractions. Again, people say, Toni Morrison is quoted a lot about the point of racism and distraction. And I don't know if enough people sit with it and think of how racism today takes so many forms, where even your own brother and sister is a weapon in the system that keeps you distracted.
Yeah.
Now, that's just not my ministry. I'm just not going to show up for racism. I'm not going to make it that too easy for that system to continue doing this. Where now we're also caught up in our own oppression Olympics. I don't have time for that. That's not the revolution. Nor is it a bunch of us getting rich to then become the philanthropist.
Yeah,
that's not the revolution.
Black Billionaires Club.
That's not the revolution either. Here at home or in the planetary scale or matter of things, it is not the revolution. We still have within us that energy and the knowledge and the insights that were left behind by those who tried these things at different points in time to build upon, right? To keep pushing, to keep hoping there's something more. If it's exclusionary, it means it's only a few of us getting it, so that we're giving back this trickle down thing. If we can stop calling it the revolution and stop worshipping it, that's enough as a because it keeps us focused. And I really think that right now it's our energies and how we keep ourselves focused that is going to really help us rehabilitate on a sort of like as a long-term scale thing, as opposed to we wait for another scandal, another moment of brokenness to try and build ourselves only for that to be broken again. It's clearly not going to keep working, and Black bodies can only take so much harm as much as people think we are capable of shouldering anything.
We are so resilient.
One more person said that to me.
I'm very soft. I'm not resilient at all. I break very easily. I totally reject like these systems put in place to like make us prove our worth. Praising us about like, oh, you take on so much. And I'm like, no, I don't want to.
You're so strong.
I just want my practice to be about laziness. Like I need to get to the point where I go and like throw a bucket of red paint on the floor and am praised by Vanity Fair. I'm on the, like I need to be on covers of things for like petting a donkey. I'm trying to Marina Abramovich, my way through life. I don't want to. This is also another thing about how funding, because it's so reliant on like foreign forces, most art funding is very activism. It's very go tell your people their problems in their language.
Right.
I don't think I've actually ever come across a funding platform that was like, do what you want. It was always like, there's this issue and we need you to communicate this issue to your people. I'm like, my people know the issue because they live it. Like it's not new to them. So what exactly, where exactly is the space for me to express something that's not an issue? Where's the space for me to make fan fiction based on Luanda Magere or Simbi Nyaima? Like, I don't think Simbi Nyaima gets enough time. Like, where's the space for me to like make that without it being like, oh, this is a historical, cultural, like for me to
artifact or whatever.
Like for me to just imagine without it being tied to the agendas that be. And
this conversation came up a couple of years ago at a HIVA forum. And also, if you were to have, say, what has been sort of being championed even in other sectors like tech, where local funders, angel investment and that kind of thing. And I raised the small matter or not so small matter of, well, great, if we can even find a few folks who feel like they can give away some of their billions to art, right, for art's sake. If they themselves had their art within them killed at some point, they're not going to see how they're going to give that back. So even on a consumer level or blesser level, if that person is not whole and understands what art could mean, they'll see it as a tool for power. Because the few I've come across who sometimes, there's a power play there, and make it so that I can do something bigger with it and show myself as this powerful or distinguishable actor in this panopticon of riches, I think there cannot be really any form of like sustainable art ecosystem that does not have sustainable actors, right? Wholesome actors
Yeah.
You end up with that cycle of there's the traumatized person who has a patron, or the patrons are traumatized. The would-be consumers are like, if it's not a Mwiko, leave me alone. But again, we have these few spaces already that are so cool to watch. And again, I use Twitter specifically because I sort of gave up on Facebook personally.
Same.
Just the you see those little moments, people are learning and unlearning from one another. It's unmediated, it's long-winded, but I must say, having now been on these apps for so long, decades plus, oh my god, you see the arc. I know, auntie years are here. The arc of small change. The people I can imagine who maybe start to come up into that color and makes them blessers in this economy, who hopefully will have that thing now, knowing at the back of their minds, just because they've been on this app and interacting with people and seeing this, that hopefully that will make their decision down the line a bit easy. It's also, we're looking at very long-term changes here. We're not going to have a better world tomorrow. But those are the little building blocks we must not forget that have been in place, absent any other support. And it's, while we explore whether it's to formalize them, disrupt them, or whatever, keeping ourselves intact on the notion that it's about being wholesome human beings, that we can really have thriving creative sectors, whether they're economies, whether it's just an existence, is, I think, for me, the ultimate thing that also distinguishes it from being yet another market, something regulated by market forces, which, as we can doing so, let's not readily sacrifice this wholesome thing that actually I think is at the core of being human. Or, as I was saying in another, I mean, for me, creativity is the soul of this nation. It's dying, but it's the soul. It's been killed, but it's the soul. And so in saving the soul, it's not to sell it again to another higher bidder. It's to actually revive it and nourish it, which is a bigger meta thing. And hopefully we can always keep that as the North Star in how we will proceed going forward.
Yeah. I think for me, just to go back to Black is King, the interesting thing for me is a few years back with Black Panther, there wasn't, everyone was just it's like Black people in a great light, and we are happy and we are thankful and thank you. And for me, the growth was seeing people saying we don't feel represented, especially because endemically, the British have told us, and it's in our curriculum, and the government will tell us in case we forget, that we're not good enough, right? Especially creatively, we're not good enough. And to see people say that we would rather fail in this our story, we would rather have the worst singer next to Beyonce and be embarrassed than not be there. I was like, this is growth, because before, everyone was we're just thankful that Lupita was the princess from Kisumu, we're just one speck of dust that was thrown our way. We're just so grateful. Wakanda forever. Wait, no, that's not it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Katika mawingu doesn't make sense. No.
Katika mawingu.
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's beautiful growth where we can, and hopefully it's being heard on the other side, because now by the take 3, I also ask Kenyans, our limit reach, because a point where sasa tutapimana bangi, as they say.
Yeah.
Enough. You start listening, else we start. We can really show up. We small and mighty warriors we are.
Yeah.
We show up and complicate the whole equation. By the stop, So, because that's all we have left. We've been so misrepresented.
Yeah.
Really mentality. I mean, I love it. I appreciate it. I don't know how I feel about that being the only time we're taken seriously or take each other seriously,
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it, that we have to raise hell, literally, because hell is literally people. When we raise our collective hell is when we are seen yeah, those we have such weird ends as a Kenyan existence. That's when you've seen, or when we've done such spectacular thuggery.
Yeah.
And then very little parts where somebody has done the right way. I mean, if nothing else, we do have very interesting. If a mapping of it is, if nothing else, tell us our creative souls are really yearning to live and exist. And if they have to go for the Queen Beyonce, I don't know, that would be quite the day. So hopefully her third take, or whoever's third take on representing Africa, will have spend some time on KOT, because no, by take 3 it's gonna be hellish.
Hey, KOT are yeah.
They're to be
KOT.
feared.
I mean, other times I just log
love.
onto Twitter and I'm like, what is this hellhole? And then other times I'm like, oh yes, I am actually like in this country and I exist. Yes. The
It's a
Art Cafe
fascinating
thing was
microcosm.
glorious.
That was brilliant. I mean, you don't. I love it because by the time 30 minutes, you're like, the work is done. There's no tweet to add here.
Yeah.
And not just that, it's a signal. Now, if anyone else dares do that in the business industry in Kenya,
yeah.
And you know, it's as you said, it's beautiful to see, however traumatic, however hellish sometimes that piece is. But yeah, we have these moments that make you say, hey, we're not out yet. You know, we're down, but we're not out.
Yeah.
How we can build upon them to stop, go beyond the moments. For me, that's been something I've been very keen on helping think through, help support, help figure out. I'm not trying to position myself as the one to build. It's not my forte, for example. So I'm like, if it comes to thinking, that's my MO. Thinking, I can do. I'm still trying to find a way. I'm not going to try and then say, because of my thinking, I am the one to be the chief CEO / COO / whatever forever. It is not my ministry.
Yeah.
It's not my ministry. I wish a few more people could say that, and it would make for such newer, refreshing ways, because we cannot be everything, and we need to let that one go.
Yeah.
We need to let that one go. Listen, I do have to run.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you for...
Yeah, we've talked. What?
Yeah.
It's fun. This is hilarious.
I'm like, how is it
really made
almost 3:30?
3:30, and I'm like, oh, damn.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad. Yeah, let's see what you end up with, because it's also... I was like, when you said sunny things, I have decorum. I was like, oh, okay. Thanks for the vibe vote of confidence.
I think I'm at fault. You know, Sunny was just
and you know, but look, why must everything have this curated cuteness? We're living through very strange times.
Yeah, really. And I honestly,
and this is how most of us speak.
Conversations. One, I think conversations are just the best way that like I learn personally, and like panels sort of give me 4 vibes that I'm not yet over. So I'm like, you know, if we could like talk about stuff and like laugh and be okay, I'm like, okay, that's better than me being like, so statistically, what do you think? Like,
that's why I like multimedia, because I think that still now we have the tools that can allow you to produce elements in multiple formats. Where like podcasts, for example, you can carry the script or the transcript and just lightly edit it, a TLDR version, and you have the audio and video. We can use everything now to give people all in one experience, a way to, because I love to read, for example, but I do this because people keep inviting me, and I'm like, okay, clearly I'm saying something that counts. But my primary form is I'll sit and I'll read, and then I'll imagine and I'll animate these people in my head. So we have the tools now to create, you know, interesting ways that do stuff. So I don't agree with the whole we must have this format. Let's make it give the rawness of it all, give all there is to it, and
and I think that's also a thing, especially when you're talking to creatives and not and there are people who are like eyeball oriented, there are people who like to listen, people who read, and you know, I was telling my sister about like the Kekobo pamphlets and how aesthetically my mind does not allow me to read them because of just how they look. I'm like, how can you try to help artists when you've given them this, like, they're creatives. Aesthetics are so important. Why would you give an ugly thing and then be like, we've done our, it just didn't make sense. Part. Yeah, I'm like, no. Like, you haven't taught them about copyright. Like, accommodate almost everyone. Like, just be like, okay, but if we make it white and black with like a nice font, that's already more accessible.
Simple. And people don't realize that you can still default to simple. But that's
Yeah.
why I'm telling you, a thought has been completely removed from the process.
Yeah.
Where there's maybe one person who felt they had times on, was it Microsoft Paint? And they came up with some colors, and it's always a play on the Kenyan flag.
Yeah.
And then you can't tell, there isn't thought. So there's somebody, if you took a graphic agency to them, they'll just be saying, ile inakaanga hivi. Those people who kill the soul of doing art because they've forgotten it's about communicating, it's about showing care. And there's ways those are translated and interpreted. In fact, if we existed in a more just world where we had to interview these people before they're appointed to these offices, many of them would not pass muster.
Yeah.
Because the first order of business would be, what's your art form? You yourself as the secretary there. You have to bring something. That's what we would expect of a private sector outfit that would do the same. And since we're in the business so much of trying to privatize everything, then take the whole package. When you say you want creativity, let it be manifest in the places we say are making policy or national elements for creativity. But that's a fight for another day.
Yes.
On to my next pieces.
Okay. Thank you. I will be in touch.
This should be fun. All right. Bye.
Bye.